if that's okay. So for anyone who hasn't been to the culture sessions before, the culture session started a couple of years ago, and we used to meet in person in our woods and sit around a campfire and chat about stuff. It's really for a chance for producers, programmers, artists across Cheshire. And then since we've gone online, we've welcomed a few more people from slightly further afield as well. But a chance to come together and have provocations, inspiring speakers, to network and just feel a little bit more connected. We get a bit of funding from Cheshire East Council and from the Cultural Destinations Partnership, which is just coming towards an end now. But we'll be talking a little bit more next month about what the kind of legacy of that project might be. Yeah, we've had previous speakers like Alan Lane from Slung Low, Stella Duffy from Fun Palaces, Alex Said from Creative Tourists, and many, many more. And we, it's really a chance for us to kind of get some new thinking and ideas and be inspired by other things that are happening across the sector. So thanks everybody. I'd just like to welcome Kate Danielson from the Weston Jerwood, who's been running the Weston Jerwood Creative Bursaries with Jerwood Arts for the last 10 years. And Kate also works with various other funders to leverage additional funding for arts and culture. And I think I'm right in saying that you're based in Gloucestershire, are you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Where Kate does a variety of work around arts and culture, but she's here today to talk to us specifically about the toolkit on socioeconomic diversity and inclusion in the arts. So I will hand straight over to Kate, and I think we're going to try and do some screen sharing stuff as well. And then there'll be a chance for Q&As at the end and a bit of a kind of general roundup and wrap up. There's not loads of us, so I think we can probably manage it with people putting their hands up if they've got questions at the end. But during the presentation, if you want to note anything extra down in the chat function, we can always come back to it. So over to you, Kate.
Great, thank you very much, Sarah. And lovely to be here. I was just talking to Sarah before about the fact you normally do have these meetings around campfires in the woods, which I think sounds absolutely magical, and it's just really sad that we're not doing that today. But anyway, the idea for my talk is, I just want to give you a brief introduction to the program, which I've been running for the last 10 years. And then we'll do a sort of romp through the toolkit and talk about, I mean, they're very connected. And I think in talking about the program, we'll also give you ideas about the way that we have developed the toolkit and why it might be of use to you guys. Sarah, if we can move on to the second slide, which is a potted history of the program. The program originally started, it was in 2010. The DCMS, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, commissioned Jerwood to come up with a new program that would look at how to address the barriers to getting into the arts for those at the start of their career from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. As I'm sure a lot of you remember, back in those days, sort of 10 years ago, unpaid internships was the main way to get into the arts, and clearly that discriminated against anybody that couldn't afford to work for free. And there was a lot of research. There was the Fair Access to the Professions report that came out at that time, which showed a lot of evidence about the predominance of white middle class people working in the arts, and they wanted to do something about that. The Equality Act in 2010 came out, and they were going to include socioeconomic background in that as a protected characteristic, but veered away at the last moment. It's very hard to measure, it's hard to talk about, and it was left out of the Equality Act in the end. Anyway, so DCMS invited us to create this program. And essentially what we did was we funded organizations to create a fellowship for somebody at the start of their career from a low socioeconomic background. And it was really successful. There were 44 fellows in that first edition. But at the end of that, in 2012, there was no public funding left to continue it. But Jerwood Arts felt very strongly that socioeconomic diversity was really important, and so started this past 8 years of fundraising and partnering with other funders who shared our commitment to creating you know, some change in the organization, in the makeup of the workforce. And so we are now coming into the 4th edition of the program. We made important changes after each edition, but we weren't really seeing any change in the sector. Apart from the fellows, the individuals who were getting this wonderful experience and getting started in their careers, we weren't really seeing any change in the makeup of the sector or of the way that organizations were recruiting, really. And we had this light bulb moment with, I don't know if any of you know, I'm sure all of you know, Dave O'Brien, Dr. Dave O'Brien, who is from University of Edinburgh. He's just written this book called Culture is Bad for You, which is rather brilliant. But anyway, working with him, he said, you know, to create long-term change in the sector, you need to be working more with organizations. So essentially what we had been doing without realizing it really was inadvertently expecting the fellows to create change in the organizations they arrived in. So we funded the organizations and they created these roles, but we weren't working with the organizations themselves to make sure that they were ready to welcome, you know, that they had a welcoming environment for the fellows, and we weren't working with them to make sure that they were making organizational change, so that in future when they recruited somebody, they would be changing their practices. So in this new edition of the program, which is just kicking off this month, there's a new element where a whole extra element working with People Make It Work. And I see we have somebody from People Make It Work today, which is great, but which is so that the program is a sort of 18 months, not only of an organization having a new fellow working with them, but also for them to make a change about the way they operate. And taking the pressure off the fellows to do all the work. So just to say, so far we've had 110 host organizations and 125 fellows. And in this new edition, we've got 50 new hosts and they'll be recruiting their 50 fellows. So we'll be up to whatever the maths is there, 175 who have worked with the come through the program and 160 host organizations. They were selected, the 50 host organizations were selected earlier this year, and just at the point where we were about to start the program and announce COVID hit, we put the whole program on hold and have now just restarted this month, and really delighted that all 50 of the host organizations are still able to take part. If we could go to the next slide, Sarah. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we've changed the program in this new edition. Oh, I think we should be on number 3. Yeah, that's brilliant. Because I think this is really, I was asked to talk about not only about the toolkit, but about how things have changed since the toolkit was published last summer. And essentially, a lot of what has changed will come out in the way that we've changed this new edition, if that makes sense. But anyway, let me just talk through it quickly. So as I said, the headline of it is that we needed to make deeper sectoral change. There'd been no great change in the workforce diversity. And so what we introduced was this new element, working with people make it work, where we focus on the organisational development for our host organisations. And this is what we've been doing this month. And we're working with 150 people in total. So each organisation invites their either somebody from
Has Kate frozen for everybody else, or is that just me? Yeah, she has. She did say this might happen because her broadband's been a little bit unstable all day. So I'm hoping that she's realised, and she said just give her a few minutes and she'll join on a hotspot on her phone. Unless, of course, she hasn't realised, in which case she might be on slide 10 already. Who knows? Let me just message her and see if we can get her back. Oh, I love this because I'm really good at technical problems. Maybe if someone wants to sing along while we try and get Kate back. Oh.
I'm back again, sorry.
I think you're back with us, Kate. I did say this might happen. So.
Yes, I'm very sorry. I'm not quite sure.
We just basically got onto the beginning of this slide, really, and then we lost you.
Oh, golly. So how long have I been gone for?
Just the last, since you started talking about making change with the organisations.
Okay.
Right here.
Sorry about that. I was so busy talking.
I did wonder how long it would be before you'd realise.
Okay. No, I've got my eye on it now. I'll know if I've yes. So we introduced this new element working. We're absolutely delighted to be working with people make it work. And I was looking in the list of people here today, and I believe there's somebody from People Make It Work, which is great. So they're working with us on the organizational development program with the hosts. And the plan is that we've got this new partnership for this program that it's like us and the hosts and the fellows and all our funders all working together to create a sort of groundswell of change within the sector. And the plan is that we link much more closely with other organizations outside the program throughout our sector, and also work with others beyond the sector in other industries who are doing the same work. The second difference is that our fellows in this edition of the program will all be artists of some sort, artists, curators, producers. But the idea is that we're much more front and center about changing who gets to make art from now on, who gets to make those powerful decisions about what art we all see and what gets commissioned. The program was never a welfare to work program. It was never a program just about getting people into the arts. It was always a leadership program. It was always about increasing representation in the arts. But we're being much more I suppose we're expecting, the idea with host organizations is that their fellows will have a significant connection with their artistic leadership. So it feels like this is never more important than now with COVID and the impact it's having on those who are trying to get work made. The third area is in intersectionality. This was always an important part of the program, but even more so now with Black Lives Matter and people understanding more about how lived experiences are all very individual, and there's a lot of overlap between the characteristics which create barriers. Number 4 is this support for fellows as they progress. We know from working with our alumni on the program that the next step after they come out of the fellowship is really tough, and that we need to do a lot more to support them as they come out of their year-long fellowship to ensure that they make the next step. And fifthly, this idea of eligibility. In the past, we used full maintenance grant throughout university as a criteria to assess low socioeconomic background. And we've taken away the requirement in this edition for it to be for graduates only. That was obviously is no longer relevant. I mean, you don't need to do a degree in order to be an artist. And so hosts will find their own voice. They'll find their own way of assessing who this fellowship is for. But we have some pointers that we'll be using through the toolkit, which will help them. So yeah, it's an exciting moment for the program. It's a big development for the program, and we're very excited. We're planning to launch in October the 20th, which will be a moment where all the roles will be announced, and the host organisations. Sarah, just the next slide. Just to say, important to say that this is an unusual program for Jerwood, who you probably know are funders of the arts, but in this program we are fundraisers. So the majority of the funding for this program comes from this list of funders, and we're really thrilled because they're all very actively involved, not just funding, but also want to learn from the program and be involved. So we've got Arts Council England, Arts Council of Wales, and Creative Scotland, for example, all coming together. So that's enough about the program. If I can just, so here is there's a slide as well, but the this is the toolkit. It was published last July 2019, and it came out of a mix of the host's experience of recruiting and working with their fellows, what we've learnt through evaluation, and the experiences of our fellows, and best practice guidance from the Bridge Group, who we partnered on this. They're they don't normally work in the arts. They're a cross-industries consultancy who use research to promote social mobility. So the idea of this was that we wanted to share the experiences, and we wanted to it's a sort of complement to other guides. It's not meant to be a one-size-fits-all or a one-stop shop. It's sort of a complement to other toolkits that are out there. So others of you might have come across the UK Theatre's theatre casting toolkit, which is great, and Arts Council England have introduced this new measure. As you probably know, that MPOs need to measure the socioeconomic background of their workforce in future. So this sort of came out at the same time as this other guidance was coming out last year. We plan to update it at the end of this edition, so in 2022 we'll update it with the experiences of our hosts in this edition and with the fellows who were involved. It provides a variety of guidance about why socioeconomic diversity is so important, about how to start to make these changes, or how to make the next steps if you're already long on your journey in this. You know, I mean, it's trying to get a sort of groundswell going so that we actually start to see some real change. And that's why sharing all of this information seemed really important to us, to those who aren't directly involved in the program. Before I run through the contents in a bit more detail, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time with our top 5 tips, which are outlined in the toolkit. So if you don't have a chance to look at the toolkit, at least, you know, hope you'll get something to take away. So Sarah, if we could just go to the next step. So the first tip we talk about in this is measure socioeconomic background and publish. And I don't know, it'd be interesting to know how many of you are already aware of these 4 monitoring questions, which are being promoted by government. So the Cabinet Office use it, where this is the four questions that the Arts Council are requiring MPOs to monitor and report back on in future. So the 4 are
Okay, so I'm not sure if you can hear me, but you've frozen again.
sorry, I've gone on to hotspotting with my telephone now, so hopefully that's better. Sarah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we've got you back now. Thanks, Kate. So we just got to the beginning of, oh, I think I've slipped off the slide, but I'll go back to it.
Yeah, it's the four questions.
4 measures, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I got through to the end of them, didn't I? I got to parental occupation.
No, not quite.
Okay. So yes, the 4 questions here. These are the questions to ask of your workforce, of artists you work with, freelancers, really of everybody you engage with. So the type of school they were at, that's whether it was a private or state school, whether they were on a free school, meals, highest parental experience of higher education, and parental occupation when they were 14. And I think it's important to, when you ask these questions, if this is new in your organization, is to provide some rationale for why you're collecting this. And Susan Oman, a researcher, did a really useful report for the Arts Council about, she trialed these questions with some MPOs and discovered that if you explain to people why you're collecting this information, then it doesn't feel so alien and they're happier to share this, what feels like slightly random questions. But the important point is to know where you are. If you're going to start making changes in the organization, it's important to know where you are before you start making changes so you can compare that as you go along. So the idea is to start collecting this information, collect it every year, measure and compare, and then you can start benchmarking your information within the sector, within your art form, within your area, however you choose to, and also outside our sector. And when you're ready is to publish it and share it with others. I think the important thing to say is to collect it about everybody you work with, as I said, you know, with participants on your outreach programs, with applicants to job roles. If we can go to number 2. And this is have conversations about taste, talent, and merit. I think this is kind of a starting point for any organization who's interested in changing who they work with and who they are attracting into their organization, because it's very easy for us all to think that we share values and we share language, but it isn't. It's very different for people from different backgrounds and from different experiences. So you know, I think it's important to talk at all levels in your organization, and to challenge your assumptions about what, you know, what is a really good, what's a good text, what's good theatre, what's good art, because we do have very different experiences of that, and educating yourself about terminology and about what different things mean to different people. Number 3, Sarah, is and moving on from this, obviously these are all very interconnected, these suggestions, but creating a more inclusive organizational culture so that you create an environment where people feel welcome. And this is a step that we missed out on in earlier editions of our program by not ensuring that organizations were ready to receive their fellows. For some of our fellows, it was a difficult induction process. So I think this, you know, being, for example, one of our fellows in the last edition was at Curve in Leicester, and she reported that on her first day at the organization, the artistic director came downstairs to meet her at reception, take her upstairs, introduce her to everybody in the organization. And she said that was an incredibly important moment for her, to feel that she was being welcomed into the organization so generously. Number 4, Sarah, is cease unpaid and unadvertised internships, jobs, opportunities. But basically, any opportunity you have, you should advertise, because anyone you let in through the back door excludes those who are not in your network. So I think, I mean, certainly we've seen a big change in this in the 10 years we've been running the program, but I think there is still often a tendency to push opportunities out through your existing networks. It's easier that way, and it can, often people are in a rush to fill a role, or, you know, and that just it cuts out anybody new from getting into your organization. And I think, you know, small actions have big consequences, and that is something that we've learned. If I can go to number 5, which is create more inclusive recruitment processes. Essentially, this is what the toolkit is focused on, is providing some advice about how to do this. And this is probably the single most important action that an organization can do, is to sort of take it right back to basics about how you present yourself to the outside world. I was hearing the other day that the Opera House, for example, in London, have taken their name and their branding off their adverts. So they discovered that it was, you know, that the name, that their brand essentially was stopping people from applying because they felt it wasn't for them. And so by making a really sort of a very bold statement like that, that they found that they were getting a much wider range of applicants for their roles. And I think this understanding achievements in context and transferable skills in other sectors, there's a lot of what they call contextualized recruitment, where they are looking at, you know, the qualifications people receive in context. So your A-level results from a certain school compared to other schools will be very different. And so, you know, and an internship in, you know, an amazing sounding internship in New York, is that really, what does that tell you about the person? And is it really make them a better fit for your organization? So if I can go on to the next slide. So a little bit, so mainly, so those are at the start of the toolkit are those 5 top tips. It then goes into this action plan, which is provides a breakdown of different ways that you can recruit and that you can advertise and that you can ensure that your employees can progress. And it's divided into two columns really. One is baseline and one is advanced. So hopefully it gives you different ideas depending on where you are in your journey. So the action plan is a good thick part of that. And then there's a range of appendices which offer you advice about those monitoring questions in more detail and how to analyze them. And there's a glossary of language, of terminology, and case studies from our host organizations in there. And we've shared the link to Jerwood website where we have a page on the toolkit. You can download it from that page, but also it provides some bite-sized chunks in there. If you don't want to download the whole toolkit, it provides some sort of ways in to that information. And also a film that we did last year with experiences from some of our fellows. And if we go to the next one, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we've been working on with our host organizations at the moment, is this idea that we can't, this toolkit, neither this toolkit nor the program nor anything else can provide you with a step-by-step guide to how to become a more diverse and a more inclusive organization. You have to find a way that works for you and a voice that works for you. And it's brilliant to read how other people have done it and to read research and look at case studies and examples. But essentially you have to find the way it works for you as an organization in order for it to be sustainable and also for its need. And I call to action. I mean, I'd really love you to send me any thoughts you have about the toolkit. What has worked for you, what didn't work, what you don't agree with, and any examples of how you've put that into action. We'd really love to hear about it, because it will be updated, as I said, in 2 years' time. So, and it's going to be very, very different, I think, by that stage. The next slide, please. I've just added some a few ideas of other reading in here, which you may have come across already. So The Culture is Bad for You book by Dave O'Brien, which came out this month. Class Ceiling, which came out last year, which you may have read, but is really interesting. And then a few of these, a few anthologies, which are really good to read. And also we'll be, as I said, we'll be doing the press launch of the program on the 20th, October the 20th. Please look out for that, and please encourage people in your networks, potential fellows, to apply. They'll all be young, not young, because they might be any age, but people starting out in their careers with an artistic practice of their own, who would benefit from. And so, just to my final slide, I just wanted to say, for us, as a program, we're going to be taking these next 2 years to learn alongside our hosts and our fellows, and collaborate as widely as we can. We're working at the moment with the Social Mobility Commission. They're creating a creative industries specific toolkit. So whereas ours is focused on the arts, this is a much broader one for the creative industries. And we're very open to change, and we're expecting to get some things wrong. It's a complex situation. We've been working in it for a long time, but we are in no way think of ourselves as experts. And I think that's the sort of community we want to create around this program, is that this is a very live issue at the moment. And whether you talk about it as social economic background, whether you talk about it as class or about income, it's a very important point we've reached, I think, in our sector. And we want to engage as much as possible and learn alongside everybody else. So I feel like this is sort of the beginning of a big step for everybody, and I hope that's helpful. And I'd love to hear everybody else's thoughts.
Oh, Kate, there's a question there, Kate, about whether or not you'll be able to, we can share the slides. Are you happy we're recording this, so I think you'll be able to see the recording as well.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, very happy for that to be shared.
Brilliant. So if people want to put their hands up, just unmute yourself, if that's even possible. Is it possible? Hopefully you can unmute yourself. Or allow participants to unmute themselves. I've ticked that box. That should be the case now. Kate, I'll kick off with it. My first question, I guess, is like how much pushback, or if you had any pushback, or what are the problems you've encountered with those those ways of measuring?
Well, I think some people find it really intrusive. You know, why should I? Why should I tell you if I was on preschool meals? Why is an organisation collecting that sort of personal data about me? So I think you know, you do really just have to explain that you are trying to make a change in your organization, and in order to make that change, you have to know where you are at the moment, and that is recognized. Academics from government and other sectors have recognized those 4 questions as being a key way of determining the background of individuals.
Yeah, it would be great actually to know whether anybody is already using those measures and whether anybody's had any practice with them. I'm guessing not.
I mean, were you surprised by those questions, or had you seen them being asked before?
I hadn't. I'm not sure if other people had.
It's hard for me to remember because I deal with it all the time. So I have to remember that for some people it's the first time they've seen them.
Yeah, I work for a couple of NPOs, and we were asked this year on our data survey to respond to just the parents' occupation at 14 question.
Oh right, interesting.
So that's the only, they decided to kind of ease us in, I think, with just choosing that one. And I certainly for one of those organisations, the board had some quite significant questions about what the measure, not necessarily about why it was collected, but what the significance of that question was. And I think it was quite a difficult sell for them. Yeah, but I mean, we've also we've had some other conversations with our board about other types of monitoring for them as well. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. Do you think that the rest of the questions will get rolled out in the annual survey in the next year?
Those 4 questions for the Arts Council.
Yeah.
Do you mean? Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, I was part of a webinar for the Arts Council at the end of last year where they announced it. I don't know whether it has been, I don't think it's been, as far as I know, it hasn't been put on hold because of COVID, but the plan was it was being rolled out as a pilot from April this year. It would be voluntary information for the first year, and then after that it would be mandatory for all MPOs to collect that information. So it'll be very interesting to see what the take-up is. But it's interesting. I mean, Susan Oman's report, which is on the Arts Council website, great detail about piloting that with a number of MPOs and discovering how you can take your staff along with you, and how at the beginning there was a lot of pushback, and then once it was explained in more detail, people understood why and felt happier to share that information. I mean, the problem is that there is a problem. And unless it can be measured in some way, it's very hard to know what progress has been made.
Can you hear me? If I speak?
Yeah.
This is okay. Just to say, I work in the theatre, and it seems to me that the socioeconomic diversity is really one of the hidden protective characteristics. It really ought to have been part of the Act, but so some of the issues seem to be very sort of similar to me in terms of pushback from measuring you know, whether you're having any effect or not. And I think Kate's quite right. Unless you can measure it, unless you can explain to your staff and to everybody, to your trustees, why you're measuring it, you're going to have a lot of pushback. We in our organisation, we're working on diversity in terms of getting more diverse cultures, I suppose, in our organisation. And so we do have a question that goes out to all of our singers, which asks about their background. And that received an enormous amount of pushback to start with, you know, from inside the organisation. Why do we need to ask those questions? So I think the senior managers need to know why, as Kate said, why that's important, why measuring it is important. And I think it's the same issue that you would have with socioeconomic diversity. Unless you know and are able to say why that's important, you're going to struggle to get people to come on board.
Mm. Well, if I can say, there are some really good stats, not good stats at all, but useful stats, which the, again, Dave O'Brien's leading on with the PEC. And I think that's the sort of information which you need to share with boards if you get pushback, is to say, you know, just take a look at these figures. You know, it's absolutely shocking. You know, knowledge is power, and possibly the pushback is because it, as you say, it is quite an invisible issue, but it's no less real for that. And I think you know, it's a very important intersectional characteristic as well. Socioeconomic background, we know that it intersects very strongly with other barriers, and so it's a very important measure, which I think you know, data is really important, and I mean, in some ways pushback is good. I mean, I think people feeling strongly about something it can be turned to advantage. I think take advantage of the fact that people are pushing back to provide them with the data and the evidence they need.
I wondered, Kate, whether you knew of people who are working, because this is about entry into the sector. I just wonder if you know of anyone who's working at like a governance level around socioeconomic diversity, whether that's come up. Making sure that the board governance is socioeconomically diverse.
Well, yes, that's interesting. I mean, that's partly why in this edition of the programme we're requiring all host organisations to nominate a trustee who is part of the programme. So we'll take part in all of the organisational development. I mean, I think CLAW are doing more with boards now, and diversity is part of that programme. But no, I don't know. I don't know of anything at that level specifically that's taking place.
Yeah, there is I don't know whether it's on the agenda. I know there's some governance now, online sessions coming up in November, so I guess it might be on the agenda there. I'll have a look out for it. Andrea, did you have a question?
Yeah, it's just about consistency and also how we manage data. And I think it would be helpful, whether it's the Arts Council or somebody else, to have this messaging keyed up so that we're all saying roughly the same thing, not necessarily exactly the same, but you know, that data's vital to provide the evidence. It would be very helpful if each organisation had to scrabble around to both find it and then reinterpret it. And then the other thing is really, I think at the moment there is quite a lot of suspicion about how certainly larger organisations, of which the Arts Council may be one, is using data, not because it's the Arts Council, but just because of the way that government is feeling at the moment. I don't think there's a lot of trust from people generally back to the government. And some of this stuff is deeply personal. For me to tell you that I was on free school meals is quite an emotional commitment for me. So I think thinking about how we anonymise data and how we are absolutely sure that it's properly protected would be really helpful.
I mean, I suppose in aggregate form, but are you talking more about if you're supplying that information, you know, if organisations are asking their workforce to supply that information to HR or to the, is that what you're talking about, or about the aggregate data supplied to the Arts Council? You're on mute, I think.
I think it's both.
Yeah.
You know, smaller organisations, this is very personal stuff for a small group of people to know.
Yeah. I think it's also about, that's why it's also about the having conversations. I think we do hear from people saying, you know, I had no idea, you know, that you know, our artistic director has the background. You know, we all sat down and we talked about things that were quite personal to us, and discovering that you know, we all make assumptions about people, but actually when you sit down and talk to them and you find that their background might be very different from what you perceive them, we all imagine that you know, well, imposter syndrome, I suppose, you know, there's a lot of, everybody talks about that in our program. And I think people assume things about each other. And actually, if you sit down and you create a safe space in which people feel able to talk about how they got to where they are, it's about building up trust, which is why everything about this journey is interconnected, because unless you have that trust in an organization, you're not going to share that information. But until you have that, we can't collect this picture across the sector, which I think is so important for making change happen. I think, yeah, leaders need to be more transparent, I think, about sharing their journey. And yeah, I think only then will you get to a point where people are happy to fill in forms like that. But it's happening in other sectors. I mean, the brilliant thing about working with the Bridge group on this toolkit was, you know, that's their world. They work in professional services, and that is has made a big difference to the way other sectors are recruiting, by knowing this information, by asking this information, by it becoming a more common thing to see a lot in monitoring information. I think it's becoming more palatable the more you see it. The first few times you see it, it feels really shocking, but the more you see it and the more you understand how that information is being used in a way which is about opening up access, not personal data for the sake of it, but as a way of making it easier to access other professions.
And are there any sectors that are ahead of the game there that you've heard about from the Social Mobility Commission or others? You know, who's getting it right?
Well, actually, Cabinet Office, I mean, the Foreign Office and those sectors have been quite ahead of the game. And I've been in with a number of webinars at the Social Mobility Commission, and I've been really impressed actually by some of the big accountancy firms and legal firms, because they've for them, obviously, the business case of diversity is incredibly important. and they have produced that research that shows diverse teams are more successful financially, and that's a big driver, of course, in those sectors. So they all use these 4 monitoring questions, and it's you know, it's become pretty standard in those industries.
Brilliant. Oh, well, thanks ever so much, Kate. We're coming to the end now, so I don't know if anyone's got any last quick thoughts, or if you've got anything. Yes, Mark, did you want to?
Oh, you've gone.
Mark, we can't hear you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry about that. So my question, I guess, was surrounding access to arts education. So how does this now or down the line trickle down to that? So obviously fees for education, tuition fees, etc., are rising constantly, and I'm sure will rise. If we're wanting to diversify people in the sector, make sure that people from different backgrounds can come into the sector, how does this sort of respond to education? Is there any sort of connection there?
Yes. I don't have experience specifically in I have to say in the last in previous editions of the program, we've tried to work more closely with universities and higher education in order to you know, get them to sort of feed their graduates through into the program. It's just such an unwieldy big sector to engage with, I've found, higher education. But yeah, I'm not really qualified to answer that, I'm afraid. It's I'm aware that this program is very much part of a sort of pipeline into the arts. So clearly that starts from a very early age. And that, you know, information about careers in the arts can start very early on, but it's not an area that we've engaged with through this program.
It could be something we come back to, though, Mark, in terms of the culture sessions, because we haven't really done much about the education, arts in education generally. So maybe we'll put that on the agenda for the future if it's something people are interested in. But thanks very much, Kate. Thanks for joining us today. Go ahead and look at the toolkit, everybody, if you haven't done so already. And yeah, we'll circulate the date for the next culture session shortly. But yeah, lovely to see everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Everyone. Bye.